So the White House has just put out their list talking about the Smithsonian museums and exhibits that don't line up with Trump's version of American history. They're going after things about slavery, immigration, gender, queer identity, civil rights, even art and quotes that have been around for years. The point that I'm going to do here with this series is not whether what my opinions are on the pieces on that list, right? I could do that in other content. What I'm doing here, though, is pushing back against the censorship of art and history and calling out the way this regime is trying to rewrite our story. So I'm going to be doing a series where I highlight one of these pieces each day, or every couple of days, depending on how busy I am with my other work. Whether it's a book, a work of art, a piece of music, or like today, a talk or a speech. My goal is to make sure these things are remembered and not erased. So today I'm starting with an excerpt of a talk delivered by historian Ibram X. Kendi, National Book Award-winning author of Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist, and one of the leading voices on race and policy in America. The talk is titled The Unloaded Guns of Racial Violence, and here's an excerpt from that. Powerful people have instituted racist policies, typically out of cultural, political, and economic self-interest, and those policies then lead to the creation of racist ideas to defend those policies, to make you and I believe that the effects of those policies, which are consistently racial disparities and inequities, are not the cause of those policies, but are the cause of Black inferiority, so that we can then spend our time thinking that the problem is people as opposed to policy, and then they can continue to benefit from those policies. And then people consume these racist ideas, and that is how they become ignorant and hateful. That is what I write about and show in Stamped from the Beginning, showing that the relationship is not racist ideas leading to racist policies, but racist policies leading to racist ideas. But another storyline in Stamped from the Beginning that I don't really talk about as much that I would like to talk about today is the relationship racist policies and racist ideas and racial violence. That's a relationship that I don't necessarily talk about, but I think it's crucial for us to understand the role, the function that racial violence plays. And it reminds me of something that happened in this country not far from here at the beginning of the 20th century. On October 16th, 1901, the newly sworn-in president, Theodore Roosevelt, hearing that Booker T. Washington was in town, had him over to his house for family supper. Roosevelt did not think much of this invite, failing to size up the mood in 1901 of segregationist, the mood of so many Americans whose decades of voter suppression, laws, and racial violence had finally succeeded in removing the last Black politician from Congress in January 1901. Americans who were learning from scholars from Columbia University's well-respected Dunning School that during the Reconstruction era that followed the Civil War, that the white South had been victimized by corrupt and incompetent Black politicians. All the forces that made for civilization were dominated by a mass of barbarous freedmen, wrote the school's dean William Archibald Dunning. Americans like novelist Thomas Dixon, who in 1901 was writing his Reconstruction trilogy, that to teach the North what it has never known, the awful suffering of the white man during the Reconstruction period, and to demonstrate to the world that the white man must and shall be supreme. Americans like the Daughters of the Confederacy, one of the more influential organizations, energizing the largest ever wave of new Confederate monuments in the early 20th century. Monuments that sat on subjected bodies like the unloaded guns of Jim Crow. Americans like William Hannibal Thomas, who wrote in his 1901 acclaimed book about a black record of lawless existence led by every impulse and passion, causing Black people to call this Black man the Black Judas. Americans like Mississippi Charles Carroll, who titled his bestseller the previous year, The Mystery Solved, The Negro a Beast. A soulless beast prompting W.E.B. Du Bois to capture and present 2 years later the souls of Black folk. When Roosevelt's press secretary casually notified Americans the next day of Booker T. Washington's visit, the social and racist earthquake was immediate and loud. Black Americans were largely beside themselves in glee, and many fell in love with Theodore Roosevelt. Now that love didn't last, but to segregationists, Roosevelt had literally crossed the color line. He says, when Mr. Roosevelt sits down to dinner with a Negro, he declares that the Negro is the social equal of the white man, stammered a restrained New Orleans newspaper. But South Carolina Senator Ben Pitchfork Tillman was not restrained. The action of President Roosevelt in entertaining that will necessitate our killing 1,000, the N-word used again, in the South before they will learn their place again. This is a U.S. Senator, Tillman, who was no stranger to racial violence. In Hamburg, South Carolina, the local black militia celebrated the July 4th centennial in 1876 like people were across the country. Aryan white racists hated the militia for maintaining black people's local ability to control this majority black town. During the parade, harsh words were exchanged while a local white farmer ordered militia members to move aside for his carriage. The farmer appealed to former Confederate General Matthew C. Butler, the area's most powerful Democrat. On July 8th, Butler and a small posse ordered the militia head Union Army veteran Doc Adams to disarm the Hamburg militia. Adams refused, and fighting broke out. The militiamen retreated to their armory. Butler dashed off to nearby Augusta, but returned with hundreds of reinforcements and cannon, including Ben Pitchfork Tillman. Butler's contingent executed at least 5 black militiamen and looted and destroyed the undefended homes and shops of black Hamburg. Tillman had all year long been leading a parliamentary group of red shirts because this was an election year. The election year of 1876, when South Carolina's white supremacists finally regained control of that state through their guns and stuffed ballot boxes. When Southerners complained of the lost cause of the Confederacy, President Ulysses S. Grant realized they were complaining about their lost freedom to kill Negroes and Republicans without fear of punishment and without loss of caste or reputations. General Butler made a mockery of the congressional investigation of the Hamburg Massacre, capitalizing on the attention that was brought to him by being elected to the U.S. Senate in 1877. He blamed the massacre on innate black criminality. Blacks, he said, possessed little regard for human life. It just reminds me of people today saying that black lives don't matter, and their response is that there is actually a war on cops. Tillman also used his role in the massacre as a springboard into politics. He became the governor of South Carolina in 1890 and entered the U.S. Senate in 1895 until his death in 1918. He spoke continuously as a politician about this Hamburg massacre as sort of a badge of honor. During the Red Shirts reunion in 1909, he said, "The purpose of our visit to Hamburg was to strike terror." And the next morning, Sunday, when the Negroes who had fled to the swamp returned to the town, the ghastly sight which met their gaze of 7 dead Negroes lying stark and stiff certainly had its effect. In 1916, South Carolina erected a monument in honor of 23-year-old Tom Merriweather, the only white man who died during the Hamburg Massacre. Tom was a young hero, according to the monument's inscription, who died maintaining those civil and civic institutions which men and women of his race had struggled through the centuries to establish in South Carolina. By his death, he assured to the children of his beloved land the supremacy of that ideal. I learned from Ben Pitchfork Tillman, of all people, the real purpose of racial violence historically. When racist ideas won't subdue black people, racial violence is oftentimes next. And when the smoke from gunshots of racial violence clear, those subdued people must be shown these unloaded guns of racial violence all around them. So we remember those gunshots. So the threat of racial violence stalks our every move like our shadows. So those who adore Confederate monuments, those who cheer for the mascot, are effectively adoring and cheering for racial violence. That's essentially what we are dealing with after all these years, with so many people surrounded by so many monuments and so many mascots. And I think when we reconsider or begin to think about the monument, the mascot as an unloaded gun of racial violence, we can also begin to connect it with the larger discussion that is happening right now over what? Gun control. Over removing guns, literally, from America, particularly assault weapons, particularly weapons that terrorize Americans. And so I think when we think about the historical context of these monuments, we can literally think about it in the context of fighting against guns, because they literally have served that purpose throughout American history. Now they are not loaded, right? They are not literally going to kill people. But I think everybody can understand the analogy of what an unloaded gun can do and is doing to people. Thank you. So, yeah, like I said, I'll be doing one of these every day or every couple of days, highlighting the pieces of history, art, and memory that they want us to forget. Drop me a comment and let me know what you think, and let's help keep history alive. Thanks, guys. Take care.